So, you all see that? Does everybody see my screen right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Subversive Texts.
Yep. All right. Here we go. So, welcome to the webinar, and this is Subversive Texts. I've chosen a few different texts to study, some that are old favorites of mine, some that I've recently learned about. A lot of the ideas have come from a book that I've been reading by Rabbi Bradley Shabbat Artson, who's a rabbi in the LA area. He's the dean of the rabbinical school at American Jewish University. He has a new book called God of Becoming. So some of this text I've taken from his materials with his translations, but these are texts that I like because I think they kind of question what a lot of us assume Judaism says, or we assume what religion is or what God is. So let's start out, and you'll see what I mean with the two longest texts that we're going to do, and if we can spend as much time on them as we want. But they're texts from the Talmud, and they're Agadah, they're rabbinic legends. So let's jump right in. So I guess I'll read. Let me set it up. I'm calling this is called the oven, or often called the oven of Achnai. There's a discussion in the Talmud about a certain kind of oven, and is it, lack of a better term, is it kosher? And then they bring the case of this guy named Achnai and his oven. And so the rabbis are arguing about it. So it is taught. On that day, Rabbi Eliezer brought forward every imaginable argument, but the sages did not accept any of them. He was, arguing one way, kosher or not. Finally, he said to them, if the halacha agrees with me, let this carob tree prove it. Sure enough, the carob tree was uprooted 100 cubits away from its place. No proof can be brought from a carob tree, they retorted. There's a carob tree for your visual. So what's he saying? If my interpretation of the law is right, this miracle will prove it. And all of a sudden, a miracle happened. The tree, jumped. But the rest of the sages say no proof can be brought from a carob tree. Again, Rabbi Eliezer said to the sages, if the halacha agrees with me, let this channel of water prove it. Sure enough, the channel of water flowed backward. No proof can be brought from a channel of water, they rejoined. Again he urged, if the halacha agrees with me, let the walls of the study house prove it. Sure enough, the walls tilted as if to fall. But Rabbi Joshua rebuked the wall, saying, when disciples of the wise are engaged in a halakhic dispute, what right have you to interfere? Hence, in deference to Rabbi Joshua, they did not fall. And in deference to Rabbi Eliezer, they did not resume their upright position. They are still standing aslant. Again, Rabbi Eliezer said to the sages, if the halacha agrees with me, let it be proved from heaven. Sure enough, a divine voice cried out, why do you dispute, Rabbi Eliezer, with whom the halacha always agrees? But Rabbi Joshua stood up and protested, it, meaning the Torah, is not in heaven, which he is quoting the Torah, of course. We pay no attention to a divine voice because long ago at Mount Sinai, you yourself wrote in the Torah, after the majority must one incline. So what Rabbi Joshua, on behalf of the sages, what's he doing here? He's disagreeing not just with Rabbi Eliezer, but he's disagreeing with whom? With God. And using God's words, the Torah, to disprove God. But the subversive thing about this is if you look up this verse from Exodus chapter 23, verse 2, if you look up that verse, he's actually purposefully misreading the verse. Because the verse says, don't follow the majority if they do evil. So he's misreading, taking out one of the words and reading it, you must follow the majority. He's saying that we rabbis have the power to decide. It's not in God's hands anymore. The conclusion of the story. So Rabbi Nathan, who was there, met the prophet Elijah and asked him, "What did the Holy One do in that moment?" And Elijah said, "God laughed, saying, 'My sons have defeated me. My sons have defeated me.'" So my question to you on the call right now is, what is this subverting? Like, what do you think, like, our view of the Torah, our preconceived view, our preconceived notion of the Torah, of God, of how things work? What would this text? Why do you think I chose this text? I guess I'm asking you. Anyone? Well, let me ask it this way. Why is God happy? Why is God laughing? Feel free to chime in. Okay. What's that?
Because of their challenging God.
Yeah. Right. So God approves of the challenge, right? But what is the challenge that they're doing? How are they challenging God? What are they saying to God?
Aren't they saying that the Torah has to be lived on earth and not just in the heavens, and that we're defeating God by bringing the Torah to life here on earth.
Yeah, right. So the Torah is ours. It's for us to live by, right?
Right.
And therefore, because it's for us, it's for us to decide. And you don't play a part anymore in that decision, right? You gave it to us. It's now our job.
Gave it, and we have to implement it.
And we have to implement it, exactly. Even if it's wrong. And we could even creatively read the Torah to implement the Torah, right? So I think they're kind of even saying, even the meaning of a verse that might be plain is up for interpretation.
But to omit a word, a key word, is that really interpreting the Torah, or is that just bastardizing?
Well, it's subverting it, right? I mean, it's a subversive text, as you say.
Yeah. Right, and it's subverting, but you see, it's only the rabbis doing this. It's not saying anybody could do this, right?
Yeah.
Here, let me.
What gives you that power, Rabbi?
Right.
The rabbis.
Well, nothing gives me that power anymore, but our ancient rabbis, right? So I turn back and it says, when the disciples of the wise are engaged in a halachic dispute, what right have you to interfere? They're saying to God's voice, right, or to the miracles.
Right.
You have to be a disciple of the wise, meaning you have to be one of the sages. But within the circle of sages, we have the power to decide. They're saying, and miracles don't prove anything. Miracles and even God speaking from heaven doesn't prove anything. Only our power of argument, right?
That is a radical thought, isn't it?
It might be. Why do you think they said that?
Well, they take it upon themselves to determine what God meant or what he didn't mean. I mean, it's taking a lot of power in their own unto themselves.
Sure. It's taking a lot of power, but why do you think they feel they have to do that? I mean, you could just say they want the power for themselves.
Somebody's got to do it.
Okay, somebody's got to do it. But maybe if you think about it, they don't see miracles. They don't hear God. I mean, except in the story, of course, but they don't normally hear God making decisions, making proclamations. Maybe without a God actively engaging in history, then, like, say, what happens in the Exodus, we need to do this. If we're to live by Torah, we need to be able to know how to live by Torah. And it's the text, not miracles, that it's reading the text, studying the text, arguing over the text that determines how we live in life. Right? So I think they're saying that maybe God's voice, hearing God's voice is not a normative thing. The text is normative. So,
well, the
right?
text was written by man,
Yes.
so I suppose they can change the text.
True. But they would not have felt, I don't think, I mean, they would not have felt that the Torah text was written by people, right? Except maybe Moses. But we'll see it. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean different things at different times, and we'll see that in the next story. It doesn't mean that it doesn't live, the text. Should we go to the next story?
Okay.
All right. Here we go. The story of Moses and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Judah said in the name of Rab, this also comes from the Talmud, when Moses ascended on high, right, went up Mount Sinai, he found the Holy One affixing crowns to the letters. Right? If you see in a Torah scroll, I have a picture here. There's crowns on certain letters, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's little flourishes. Moses asked God the reasons for the crowns, and God replied, at the end of many generations there will rise a man, Akiva ben Joseph by name, who will infer heaps and heaps of laws from each tittle on these crowns. So there'll be a guy in coming generations who will be able to interpret Torah, interpret law, just by looking at these crowns. Okay? First of all, what does that say about Torah, about the text?
But it is open to interpretation.
Yeah. Even what things look like in the text, right? Even the visuals of the text are open to interpretation. You can find meaning in the tiniest little thing, right? Lord of the universe, said Moses, permit me to see him. God replied, turn around. Moses turned around, and then all of a sudden he went and sat down behind 8 rows of Rabbi Akiva's disciples and listened to the discourses. Not being able to follow what they were saying, he was so distressed that he grew faint. But when they came to a certain subject and the disciples asked Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi, where did you learn this? Rabbi Akiva replied, it is a law given to Moses at Sinai. Moses was reassured. So here we are. God sends Moses into the future. He sits down in the back of the classroom and just listens to the lecture and the discussion that's going on, but he has no idea what they're talking about. He does not recognize the Torah that they're discussing. But when he heard Rabbi Akiva say that it came from Moses, he was reassured. Why do you think Moses was reassured?
Sounds like a circular argument.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, Moses, Moses received the law and, supposedly knew it, mm-hmm. and knew what the law was. And now Akiva is saying that it's something different, and Moses is saying, I don't I don't recognize any of this, and Akiva tells him that it's what Moses got. You got it. How come you don't recognize it?
Well,
he says, I guess that's right. It's sort of circular logic to me.
well, does anybody see it in another way?
I'm just thinking what the Reform position might be on this.
Mm-hmm.
There was a study. In other words, what was true or may have appeared to be true originally is now changed with different circumstances and different times,
Mm-hmm.
and that may be a rationale for modern reform.
Okay. I mean, this is in the Talmud. This is, this is not even modern reform. This is an ancient text, right?
Not even modern Orthodox.
What's that?
I said it's not even modern Orthodox.
Right, right. So, but what was Moses reassured about? That maybe he's reassured that he saw that it was a process and that things changed and that they're still linking it back to him. Maybe that's it. Maybe he's just a narcissist and like that they mentioned his name. I don't know if that's the case because the Torah says he was the most humble person, right? But it's interesting that, he felt out of place, right? He felt out of place with his Torah. But then he was brought back into the discussion, right? He didn't understand what was going on, but he was brought back into the story, into the process, into the unfolding of the Torah, right? And that's what reassured him, maybe. And maybe he was reassured that the Torah still lives, that it's not. Maybe he's reassured that it's not exactly the same as it was when he was around. That it's grown, that it's encompassed Akiva's teachings and his students' teachings, and it all started with him. Maybe that's what reassures him. Any other ideas?
I was just thinking that this reminds me of the founding fathers of our own Constitution.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Yeah.
That we interpret, the Supreme Court interprets something,
mm-hmm.
and it's an expansion. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It's a different approach at a different time.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it shows progress.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right, and wasn't it like Thomas Jefferson said that like every 20 years you need to reevaluate it?
Right.
Yeah. Right. I think though he felt that you had to like get rid of the whole Constitution and start over. He probably didn't feel that when he was the president, but I mean this isn't starting over. This is growing, as you said, right? It's continuing. It's progressing. So let's see what happens.
Is that a rationale for reform?
It could be, yes, but I think what makes reform different is that the reform movement comes around and says it wasn't the law given to Moses at Sinai, right? It's the law that was developed over generations of people and compiled in different forms, right? So you add that into it too, the modern historical understanding of it, right? And that changes the mindset, right? So that means you can discard things or not do things while Akiva was expanding. You see what I mean?
Okay.
Right? Akiva would have. Akiva says it was the law given to Moses on Sinai, meaning that this is from God, but maybe Moses didn't understand all that was in there yet, right? And we are still unpacking the meanings throughout our day, and therefore things change or we need to read it differently today. But it's not the idea that because it was not literally given to Moses on Sinai, we can change things, right? The rationale is different. So shall we continue to see the conclusion of the story? Moses returned to the Holy One and said, Lord of the universe, you have such a man, yet, I'm sorry about the typos, yet you give the Torah not by his hand, but by mine. So Moses is saying, Akiva, he's much greater than I was. Look at all that he could teach from here. And God replied, be silent. Thus has it come to my mind. I gave you the Torah for a reason, right? I think that's what God is kind of saying. Then Moses said, Lord of the universe, you have shown me his Torah. Now show me his reward. Turn around, God said. Moses turned around and saw Rabbi Akiva's flesh being weighed out in a meat market. Lord of the universe, Moses cried out in protest, such Torah and such its reward? God replied, be silent. Thus has it come to my mind. So historically, Akiva was martyred by supporting rebellion against Rome. He was killed in a gruesome way, and this text is saying then they sold his meat, cut him up and sold his meat. But what's the saying here? What's Moses distraught about? Why is Moses protesting? What's our reward supposed to be?
Servants of the Torah, theoretically you should get reward.
Exactly. It says right in the Torah, you follow the commandments, the rain will come, your crops will grow, you'll have a lot of children. But what happened to Akiva? He was martyred. He was killed in a gruesome fashion. So what is the saying about reward and punishment?
It doesn't follow.
It doesn't follow. I mean, the rabbis knew this. I think we all know this, that we know many good people who have diseases, who die in war, who, or just are always down on their luck, right?
Right.
Maybe one has nothing to do with the other. So where's the reward?
Well, you have to believe in the future world. I mean, if you have to start out. If you don't believe in the life after death, you're in difficulty.
That could be an answer, right? So that is one traditional answer that the rabbis might have given, that at the end of days, when the world is perfected, we'll all be able to be resurrected and enjoy this world, right?
Yeah.
But I think also there's another way of thinking of it, is that it's the reward for Torah is Torah itself. The reward is doing the mitzvot. There's a story of Rabbi Akiva that when he was being martyred, he said he never knew what it would be like to really fulfill the verse to, have to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, until he said the Shema when he was dying, right? So it's the pleasure of being able to do the mitzvah is the reward in itself. And don't worry about what's coming afterwards. Don't life is hard. Bad things are going to happen to you. It's not about what we think of as reward.
What strikes me about the comments about God is he seems so passive. It has come to my mind, like he can observe but not influence.
Interesting. Hold that thought. We're going to see that in a minute. But God is passive. Yeah, maybe. It's not the God splitting the sea, right? Especially in the first text, God is so passive that or God tries to assert power, but the rabbis rebuke God, right? And God is not stopping the martyrdom of Akiva. God is letting it happen and saying that's the way it goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shall we? So we'll talk more about that soon. So
Why?
what's that?
What makes this subversive?
So that's what I think it's subversive, because we assume that religion or that Judaism, whatever, is about being a good person, you get reward, right? First of all, no reward, or even gruesome death. We think that Judaism, at least traditional Judaism, is about the Torah is given to Moses and that's it. We try to interpret what that means, right? We try to live through Torah because that happened, right? But here we have an idea of our interpretations of Torah, or the meaning we find from Torah changing throughout the ages, or progressing, right? But still, it is the Torah of Moses and Sinai. So we could find, stories like this, we could find many different readings, many different meanings. That's why I think the rabbis were masterful, short story writers. That, I'm not always sure what it means, but I find it's not clear cut. That's also why it's kind of subversive. Any other questions, comments?
It's an interesting challenge for each of us.
Yep. All right.
There are no answers, they're just questions.
That's true. That's true. I mean, that's also, when we hear, you don't have, especially in the Talmud, you don't have always answers, even when it comes to what the law is supposed to be. So let's move on. So here's back to now a question about God's power. So we're all taught in Sunday school that God is omnipotent, God is omniscient, right? All powerful, all knowing. But actually, you don't find that anywhere in the Bible, that God is all powerful or all knowing. And in fact, it might give us a lot of problems if we think that. So first, just a quick text from the Psalms. Great is the eternal and much acclaimed. God's greatness cannot be fathomed. It says great. It doesn't say all powerful. There's no such word in Hebrew for all powerful. If you read a translation of the Torah, of the Bible, often you'll see one of the names of God, El Shaddai, being translated as almighty or all powerful or something like that, but that's a horrible translation of that. There's no such thing as all powerful or almighty. God is seen as very powerful, maybe the most powerful, but not all powerful. If God was all powerful, what kind of problems would that give us?
Well, I'm just looking at 145:3. Great is the Lord and much acclaimed. His greatness cannot be fathomed.
Right. Right. But it doesn't say God is all powerful, right? And I could pick out many other places around the Torah. It talks about God's great power, God's mighty deeds, God's heroic acts, right? But it never says that God is omnipotent, as ancient Greek philosophy would have said, right? Because if God is omnipotent and omniscient, that means that God can't change. If God is all powerful, then if God is all powerful and all knowing, what does that mean for us? That means we are robots. Well, first, Jewish tradition says that God is, it says God is also merciful, right? Or God is also full of compassion, Jewish tradition says. So if God was all powerful and full of compassion, then uh, those two things can't hold because bad things happen, like to Rabbi Akiva, like, there's always argument about the Holocaust. Why did God let the Holocaust happen, right? If God was all powerful and compassionate, God should have stopped the Holocaust, right? Unless, of course, you say that God was punishing us, but then I think that's a ridiculous argument. So maybe God is not all powerful.
That's a radical thought.
I don't think it's radical. I think it's all over Jewish tradition, right? If God is omniscient, knows everything, then we have no choice in anything.
So Harold Kushner would ask, why do bad things happen to good people?
He does not ask why do bad things happen to good people. The name of the book is When Bad Things Happen to Good People, right? And he holds that if you can't hold that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and compassionate. The omnis fall away, and the other thing, and all other qualities, different kinds of qualities stay. So let's read the next one from the Talmud. When the Holy One of Blessing recalls God's children who are plunged in suffering among the nations of the world, God lets fall 2 tears into the ocean, and the sound is heard from one end of the world to the other, and that is the rumbling of the earth. So did the rabbis literally believe that God cries? I don't know. They're speaking in metaphors, but I think they believe that God is moved. God changes. God suffers with the people. Right? They said that the Shekhinah, that God's presence goes with the people into exile. Right? They're not saying that when the people are plunged into suffering, either God steps in and fights their battles, or they're not saying that when the people are plunged into suffering, God decided to let that happen to rough them up for a little bit. Right? Here it's saying that God cries. That this is not how it's supposed to be, right? People are not supposed to be suffering. Now, of course, in rabbinic texts, you'll find other things that God is letting the people suffer for a while so they can learn something. But you'll also find texts like these.
So in a text like this, God really has said, hasn't said anything, but has really let his people go. I mean, we can do as we want and mess up or not, and God is not going to interfere one way or the other.
Maybe, right? So in the first text we read, God laughed. This one, God cries. We affect God by what we do, but we're free to do it.
Yeah.
So how
God does not get inserted into the equation in any way.
Right. So then how does God get inserted? This comes from the book that I just read from Bradley Shavid Artson, that God has persuasive power, not coercive power. Right? God can't coerce us to do something, or God can't ordain something to happen, because then we'd be robots, automatons. But God can persuade us. So how does God persuade Jewish people? Like, how are the rabbis saying that God persuades? Through the text. Right? We discern what the mitzvot are, which we think is God's will. It's our determination how to do them, what they are, but that's how God persuades. Right? I think the ancient rabbis would have said a miracle can happen, but we shouldn't rely on it. That God makes things happen through human agency. Here's a text from another rabbinic text, when Israel performs the will of the Holy One, they add strength to the heavenly power. When, however, Israel does not perform the will of the Holy One, they weaken, if it were possible to say, the power of the one who is above. God can be strengthened and weakened. Right?
Still doesn't address the questions raised by the Holocaust and the death of children. very easily.
It might not, no. But you could read the text before that God is also crying. And then for us to strengthen God's hand there, that we have to do something about it. Right? We don't experience God splitting the sea anymore. And in fact, there's rabbinic statements that they try to explain all the miracles that happen in the Torah as being like natural phenomenon that go in the whole flow of creation, that they just are supposed to happen that way. It's not actually God coming in and doing it, because they didn't experience God doing that. Right? So I think these texts kind of subvert our notions of that we think that God is supposed to be omnipotent or omniscient. I don't think our ancients believed that. Are we ready to move on?
Okay.
All right. So I have some ideas about creation. So we all learned, it says, in the beginning, right? Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. But a better translation is, when God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void. That creation was not something from nothing, but it was God kind of controlling chaos. And creation was a process. Right? It wasn't all of a sudden everything existed. It was things come into being. Right? And God plays a part in that process. If you read the first chapter of Genesis with this translation, when God began to create, which is actually the translation of JPS, it makes much more sense. And here's kind of a comment on this by a great Hasidic master, Simcha Bunim. He was from the late 18th, early 19th century. God created the world in a state of beginning. The universe is always in an uncompleted state in the form of its beginning. It wasn't God created the universe and then it was so, right? It's always in a state of flux. As it says in the prayer book, in the morning prayers, that God daily renews the work of creation. So the universe is always in an uncompleted state in the form of its beginning. It is not like a vessel that the master works to finish. It requires continuous labor and renewal by creative forces. Should these cease only for a second, the universe would return to its primeval chaos. Right? Even the universe is always in a process. Like, I guess, like the interpretation of Torah is always a continuing process, but so is the universe. I mean, I don't think Simcha Bunim knew anything about modern physics or cosmology, but I think that's what scientists say today. The universe is ever expanding, right? That God is the one that underlines this, that is the source for this process of the expanding universe that we're all part of, that we all continuously labor in. I think this subverts the notion that we think that creation is, in the beginning, God created, and it was so. Right? Any comments, questions? Okay. So I think in Sunday school we learned that God is up in heaven transcendent from us, that God is separate from us. Up there, we're down here. But you'll find within Jewish tradition things that subvert that. This is from Moshe Cordovero, who was a great Kabbalist, who is from his commentary to the Zohar, which is a great work of Jewish mysticism. And this is a strain of thought that you'll find in much Hasidic literature too. The essence of divinity is found in every single thing. Nothing but it exists. Since it causes everything to be, no thing can live by anything else. It enlivens them. Its existence exists in each existent. Do not attribute duality to God. Duality meaning God is this and not this, right? Or God is here and I am here. Don't attribute duality to God. Let God be solely God. If you suppose that Ein Sof, which is in Kabbalah the most transcendent notion of God, which means without limit, emanates until a certain point, and that from that point on is outside it, you have dualized. God forbid. Realize rather that Ein Sof exists in each existent. Do not say, this is a stone and not God. God forbid. Rather, all existence is God, and the stone is a thing pervaded by divinity.
And how is that different from animism?
How is that different from animism? Okay, great. So by animism, you mean like traditional religious, like kind of nature religions, right?
Right.
How is that different? Well, it can be bordering on that, right? So it might be getting close to what you say in philosophy is pantheism, that God and nature are the same. But I think that he would be saying, if he spoke modern language, he would say that it's more panentheism, that God is suffused in everything within the universe, but is greater than the sum of all its parts, right? And therefore, you can still have a relationship with God, with divinity, and seem like you are separate from it, but you're really part of it. Does that make sense?
Rabbi Arthur Greed makes that point in his book, Radical Judaism.
Exactly. Yes. And that is, I mean, he uses it directly from Hasidic sources, right? That, I mean, this is from a great mystic, and, you could argue, well, maybe the mystics were outside of mainstream Judaism. That's what we were led to believe in a lot of Jewish studies. In fact, from modern times, a lot of Jewish historians tried to show that the mystics were outside of the Jewish story, and they were kind of rebels, and really the philosophy and seeing God as transcendent other was the mainstream. But I think that's been proven wrong by many scholars, starting with Gershom Scholem, who was a great scholar of mysticism in the 20th century. I think he showed that Kabbalah and mysticism was mainstream Judaism, or is mainstream Judaism, and therefore this maybe comes from even more ancient sources, that it's really part of a Jewish way of seeing things. And I'll show you another example. There's Abraham Ibn Ezra, one of the great medieval commentators on the Bible. If you look at what's called the Rabbinic Bible, a edition of Torah with the great medieval commentators around it, you always find Ibn Ezra, and here's some comments from Exodus, from some passages in Exodus, and he said it doesn't matter what he's really commenting on, but what it says, God is all, and all comes from God. Similarly, God the revered, who is one, God includes everything and is called one. So if God includes everything, I think that means like oneness, right? Now the one has no image. God encompasses all the images, for they all came from God. God is all, God's glory fills all, from God is all, and God encompasses all of their images. Right? And you can even go back, I think it's Isaiah who says, Meloko haaretz kivodo. God's glory fills all of the earth. Right?
So isn't that, again, contradictory to what we just discussed on God not being omnipotent and omniscient?
Right.
Who says that that contradictory things are bad? But
Typical rabbinic response.
right. I don't know if it's contradictory because I think if God fills all of creation and all of creation is part of God, I think it means that the universe works by certain rules and certain laws, and God cannot, and that because God infuses all of these, it can't be, they can't be subverted. The laws of nature can't be subverted, right? And that God works through, or God, divinity, maybe saying divinity is better than God, because when we think of God,
Well,
we
do you
think of a
have
certain being, right?
The
And
Bible
divinity
says that
works
the sun
through these
stood
laws of nature.
still.
What's that?
The Bible says the sun stood still at one point.
Okay, you're right. So in the book of Joshua,
In Joshua.
the Israelites were gearing up for battle and the sun stood still, right? So how can we read that in a different way? You could always say it's as if the sun stood still, right? You could always say that you can read the words of Torah. The words of Torah have multiple meanings, right? Maybe for simple people to think that the sun standing still, maybe that gives them an image of the power that God has and that God is behind the forces of the Israelites. But we know that nature doesn't work that way, that the sun is always comes up in the east and sets in the west, and we even know exactly what time it's going to rise tomorrow, right? And we even know that it's not really rising, it's the earth spinning on its axis, going around its orbit, right? So God is within these laws of the universe.
God was in this place, and I did not know.
Yeah. So says the patriarch Jacob when he has his experience of was that the ladder to heaven, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So that being said, if you read Maimonides, it's not going to say this, right? Or it's definitely not going to say this.
No.
But you'll find this within Judaism too, that kind of subverts our kind of Western notion of God up here, where down here God speaks, we listen, God commands, we do, and God can, if God so chooses. Even saying God chooses is then kind of subverting that God is all powerful or all knowing or whatever. But if we could say that God chooses, God then can disrupt nature, right? But we don't have to see it that way. How about this? Seeing that God pervades even the rock. Sometimes I see, though, we could get in trouble and say, well, because we are all part of God, that I am God and therefore I can do what I want, right? You wouldn't find that would be outside of Judaism. So this idea is a little bit dangerous, but very insightful way of seeing the universe. It can be turned into danger, but just like so can the totally transcendent God can then reinforce notions of patriarchy or notions of oppressive hierarchies. If God is exalted above in the heavens, then the king is next, right? And the king can do whatever the king wants, right? Or if God is up there and nothing changes, that means that the Torah given by God doesn't change, and we can use it to oppress. But if God is part of the process of the universe, if we are part of that process, if this universe is always unfolding and God is always there to be discovered, it has a much different image of God, a much, maybe you could say, gentler image. Any comments?
You make it difficult if we pray to a God we can't see, feel, or touch, and sometimes it's difficult.
But Moshe Cordovero says, but in some ways we can see, feel, and touch God. Just look around. Right?
Look at each other.
Look at each other.
But that means God is in the bad as well as the good.
It does, yeah. It does.
And is on both sides of the fence of the Holocaust.
Well, I think what someone like this would say that God pervades all of creation, and therefore God is in, if you will, in the Nazis too. But they were subverted. They were not seeing the image of God that is also found in everything else, right? And therefore, they were not working through their true divine nature, their true divine. They were not working within this process of creation that is working towards divinity and godliness. Maybe. Right? Because we are all part of this, part of the great divine. We're all part of the divinity within nature, and therefore we have to realize that we have a role to play within that. But we let our ego overcome us, and we think that we're more powerful than what we actually are. That might be a way to answer that. Does that make sense?
I think we should be careful about saying we're on God's side.
Yeah.
And those who oppose us are something that can be destroyed or extinguished.
Yes.
I think we have to be very careful about taking that position.
Right. And that's the hierarchical God, that we're on God's side and we have the we have the truth and nobody else does, and therefore we have license to act. But if you see divinity pervading everything, then it's incumbent upon you to treat the world, treat the universe, treat others in a certain way. Right? It's being created.
Why don't you ask us a question that can be easily answered?
That's not what this lunch is about. So I'll leave with one more text from the Talmud. Would that they had rather forsaken me, but maintained my Torah, for the great light emanating from the Torah would have led them back to me. It's not necessarily about what do you believe in God. It's about how you act in the world through Torah, and that can lead you to God. So my friends, I hope I gave you some texts that help you think about Judaism in different ways, maybe subvert preconceived notions that you had, quote Judaism says, and may we continue the conversation of Torah as we go on. So have a great day.
Well done.
Thanks,
Rabbi
Rabbi.
Seth, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Robin.